everyone, it's Shannon here, and welcome to a Cherry on Top's March video hop. This month's theme is embellishments. In today's video, we are going to create this bold and graphic floral card with one of my favorite embellishments, the classic clear sequins. We're going to start with the Sketch Carnation stamp set from Waffle Flower Crafts. I'm going to pull off the large flower with the stem and leaves, and I'm going to heat emboss it, so I added some anti-static powder. I'm going to ink it up in VersaMark, which is an embossing watermark ink, and then I will stamp it onto this white cardstock a couple of times just to make sure I get a really good impression and plenty of that embossing ink down on the paper so our embossing powder sticks. So here I am inking it up a second time, and then I will stamp it, and then we will go ahead and do our embossing powder. Now this embossing powder is a little bit different. I'm going to use the detailed black embossing powder from Hero Arts. I love heat embossing with some black embossing powder. I just think it makes such a bold, dark, crisp line. But if you don't have black embossing powder, you can first stamp this in black ink, then stamp it with embossing ink and just pour over clear, and I'll kind of basically create the same look. Now we're going to start to color this in using the Sketch Carnation coloring stencil. I have 2 Distress Oxides picked out. I'm going to start with picked raspberry and just lightly ink blend a couple areas. We're going to kind of create a varied look to this carnation. So first that picked raspberry very lightly, now onto the spiced marmalade a little very lightly, because we're going to use these 2 colors again for the second layer, and that'll complete our first layer for that carnation. Now I'm just sliding up the stencil here and positioning this second layer, the detail layer for the flowers. I'm going to move on to some smaller blending brushes here. I have the shader 1 brushes from Waffle Flower. Started with that spiced marmalade again, and just ink blend it over those orange areas with that spiced marmalade, and then I'm ink blending with picked raspberry over those pink areas, and this just creates a really pretty ombre kind of look on our carnation, a little bit more interesting than just ink blending it in maybe one shade. Now we're moving on to the leaves and stems. I have 3 colors picked out. I'm starting with cracked pistachio, and I'm actually going to ink blend kind of the middle section of the leaves and stem. Then I'll move on to peeled paint, a really pretty olivey kind of green, and we're going to ink blend the upper third of the stem and leaves with this really pretty green color. I love the kind of yellowness that it adds. I think it makes just a really pretty ombre look. And then I just went back to cracked pistachio just to kind of smooth out the gradation. And then we'll finish up with pine needles, a really beautiful dark green to really kind of cement this really rich ombre blend over these leaves and stems. So once I finish with that pine needles, I will just kind of smooth it out a little bit with a little bit more cracked pistachio, and then we'll be done. Or I move the stencil here, and we have that beautiful gradation over that greenery part. Now we're going to move on to this little section here. I'm going to use the same colors. First start with the cracked pistachio, then a little bit of the peeled paint, and then I'll finish up with a little bit of the pine needles. I do grab a towel here, a microfiber towel, in just a second to kind of clean up some of the ink that's on the heat embossed areas, and that really kind of brings back the darkness, the richness of that black line. And here are my 2 finished carnations. Just did the second one the exact same way as I did the first. I'm going to use the matching Sketch Carnation die to die cut them out, and now we're going to move on to our background. I have the woven panel die from Waffle Flower Crafts. I have an A2 panel of white cardstock. I'm just going to line the 2 up, run it through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to pop out all the negatives. There were a lot of little negatives that kind of stuck inside, and I just used my little tweezers to kind of pop those out, and then we're left with this really gorgeous background. Now we're going to enhance it with the jumbo stencil, or jumbo checkered stencil. I'm going to center it over my A2 top folding white card base, and then we're going to ink blend over this stencil with our same greens again, so kind of keeping our palette restrictive so everything kind of matches, or it seems very cohesive, but this will add a little bit more interest to the background than just white on white. As you can see, I'm creating this gradation at an angle, so I started in the upper right corner with that peeled paint, then moved on to shaded lilac, and then finished with pine needles. And my tape wasn't quite sticking, so I had to reposition my stencil a couple times, and I even kind of got a little bit outside of the lines, but luckily the woven panel will cover that up. Now we're going to move on to adding some foam adhesive to the backside of this panel just to add a little lift and create a really beautiful shadow. I have these wonderful 1/8 of an inch strips, which are also from Waffle flour, and I added them to the backside of the panel around the edges and even in some of the center areas. I just removed the backing. I'm going to center this and stick it down over our A2 top folding card base. Now we're going to move on to creating our sentiment. I have the Love Thanks stamp set. Grabbed a sentiment from this set, and we are going to also heat emboss this. So I'm going to apply some anti-static powder, ink it up in VersaMark ink, stamp it, and then we will move on to the detail black embossing powder to keep all of our blacks kind of the same tone. After I pour on the powder, I tap off the excess and then heat set with my heat tool. Now this awesome sentiment set also has matching dies for all the sentiments, so I'm going to use one of the matching dies to die cut, or at least the coordinating die, to die cut that sentiment out. And now we're ready to kind of bring it all together. I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the backside of the flowers. I want them to pop up as well. I just love the shadows that you get when you add the dimension. And then I'm going to make sure that they're overlapped, and you can see I have overlapping leaves. I'm just going to make sure that I don't put foam adhesive on the parts that are going to go over one of the other flowers. And then I'll remove the backing and kind of stick them down, and I position them in such a way that the back flower, you can't really see that it just kind of ends abruptly. It's a little too short. Just by angling that second carnation, we kind of cover it up, and it looks like this long, it has a longer stem. I just trimmed off the excess with a pair of scissors, and now we're going to finish by adding some foam adhesive to the backside of our sentiment. And then the last thing we have to do is our wonderful embellishments. I've chosen sequins. I love sequins for cards. It's just definitely a classic, especially the clear sequins. My clear sequins that I'm using today do have a little bit of an iridescent shine, which I think really works nicely with this color palette. Kind of brings out the yellows and greens and even a little bit of the pinks. So I think it really pairs nicely, and it just adds that little bit of shine, that little extra touch to really bring this card all together. So I did use Nouveau crystal drops to adhere those down. I love using them to stick a sequence down. And here's the finished card. I'll hold it to the camera so you can get a good look. Our beautiful bold carnations with that subtle but just the right amount of interest background. And of course, we can't forget the beautiful little bit of shine that the sequins adds. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. Please check out the other super talented artists in this hop. And if any questions about the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.